godly history in the American Heritage Series. America, this is your heritage.
In 1792, work was begun on the White House. The next year, 1793, construction began on the Capitol. 7 years later, in late 1800, the White House, the Capitol, the Treasury, and other buildings were complete enough that business could be conducted in them. And so Congress moved here, into the Capitol, as its permanent home. At that time, the adjoining room became the original Senate chamber. The second plaque notes that on November the 22nd, in the adjoining room, President John Adams delivered the first presidential speech ever given in this building. According to the records of Congress, John Adams prayed,
"May this territory be the residence of virtue and happiness. In this city may that piety and virtue, that wisdom and magnanimity, that constancy and self-government which adorned the great character's name it bears, be forever held in veneration. Here and throughout our country may simple manners, pure morals, and true religion flourish forever."
This is quite a prayer for this city and this country, and it was a prayer which occurred next door. Except for a short period of remodeling, the Senate met in these original chambers until 1810, when it moved upstairs into its second home in this building. Those second quarters, located directly above where we're now standing, today are called the Old Senate Chambers. The Senate remained in those chambers from 1810 until 1859, when the Senate moved into the chambers that it currently occupies. Having noted the three locations in this building where the Senate met, let's also visit some of the locations in this building where the Supreme Court has met. Interestingly, the locations in which the Supreme Court met during its first century and a half form a potent commentary on the founders' views of the power and the reach of the Supreme Court. Our founders made remarkably elaborate plans for the city of Washington, D.C. Our founders planned for traffic. They anticipated growth. They made far-sighted preparations for the President and the Congress, and they provided buildings and support services for both. Yet with all of their elaborate preparations, they did not provide a separate building for the U.S. Supreme Court. And this was not an oversight on their part. It was intentional. The Supreme Court met inside the Capitol. In the first 10 years in this building, the court bounced around from location to location, from various committee rooms to library rooms to whatever was available. Then in 1810, when the Senate left its original chambers and moved directly upstairs to its newer and larger second location, the Supreme Court inherited these vacated Senate chambers. It was here, in the basement of the U.S. Senate, that the Supreme Court finally found its first permanent home, a location it kept for the next 50 years. Then, when the Senate vacated the old Senate chambers and moved into its current home, the Supreme Court moved upstairs to possess the again vacated Senate chambers. It was by design that the Supreme Court had no major role in shaping policy in the nation. Simply look at the Constitution for proof. Article 1 deals with the powers of the Congress, Article 2 with the powers of the President, and Article 3 with the powers of the Supreme Court. Article 1 is by far the longest of those three articles, and Article 3 is unquestionably the shortest. For the first 10 years of its existence, the entire Supreme Court term lasted less than 2 weeks out of each year. And for the next 50 years, the court still only met for 6 to 8 weeks a year. It was not until 1935, nearly a century and a half after the founders had written the Constitution, that a separate building was built behind the Capitol to house the Supreme Court, the home it now occupies.
Dave, after hearing all of this information that you've been giving us, it would lead me to conclude that the judiciary is out of control.
We have, unfortunately in America, ceded to the judiciary powers that they were never given. We've allowed them to be the final word over every policy in America. When the Constitution is written, we gave the final word to the people who expressed it through elected representatives, that if the representatives didn't do it right, we could throw them out and put more in there to make sure the will of the people. That's why our documents say things like, we the people, consent of the governed. It has now become the judiciary, if you will, an ivory tower elite versus the people. Congress does a pretty good job of siding with the people on most issues, but Congress regularly gets struck down by the judiciary. Now, Congress took the same oath to uphold the Constitution the President took, the judiciary took. The Constitution is a simple document. We start teaching the Constitution in elementary school. So please tell me why only 9 people in the United States know what it means. It's such an easy document to read.
Wow.
What's happened is we the people have said, well, we're going to let these 9 guys, the majority of 9, 5 of them, have the final word for 280 million people, and I guess whatever they say just has to go. No, I'm as capable of reading the Constitution as they are, you are, the President is, the members of Congress probably more so, because the members of Congress actually have hearings on issues where that you hear from both sides. You get all sides in, and then you make a decision. They've had more constitutional consideration than those 9 justices who only hear 1 hour of arguments for each case. And for some reason, we have ceded to the court powers that the Constitution doesn't give them, the Founding Fathers definitely didn't give them, that we hadn't given them for 150 years, and now we've decided they get the final word. Part of it's because we don't know our own history. We think that's the way the court's always been. We don't know that we've had a religious heritage, that we've not been a secular nation, which the court tells us we are. We don't know our Founding Fathers. The court only cites 2 or 3. We have 250. I mean, we've allowed it to happen. But once we figure out what we're about and what the nation's about and what the Constitution actually empowers us to do, we don't have to put up with 5 people telling 280 million people what their values are going to be.
For more information on the American Heritage Series or to find books and other resources, visit wallbuilders.com. Through the American Heritage Series, renowned historian David Barton communicates our nation's forgotten, godly foundations and encourages us to once again view history through a truthful lens. For only when we recognize and embrace God's hand in our history can America become all that it was intended to be. Through Wall Builders, historian David Barton seeks to rebuild the walls of America's unique religious, moral, and constitutional heritage by educating the public and encouraging people of faith to become active in strengthening America's great foundations. For more information on how you can become involved, visit wallbuilders.com.